Hello, everyone, and welcome to EduCurious. Today we have a special guest speaker with us, Alona Robillard. She's joining us from actually even a different time zone, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her educational career pathway. She's doing really big things in her classroom. I first noticed it when I was walking through the hallways where I was working. Her classroom was vibrant with colors. The kids were excited to go there and be there. And then I've kept up with her as she's transitioned into a different role and kept up with her on Facebook and social media. And the things she's doing in her class are so amazing. So, welcome, Alana. Thank you for being on our show. I want to hear a little bit about how you got started with teaching.
Okay, so it's actually quite funny. So for the longest time that I know, I didn't want anything to do with education. So in my family, it seems like you're either a hairdresser or an educator. And for years, I was like, okay, I'm never going to go into teaching. I'm never going to be a hairdresser, and I'm never going to do anything with the medical field. And so my senior year, I had to get community service hours before I graduated, and I kind of waited till last minute. So my aunts worked at Janie Howard Wilson. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go there. It's going to be easy hours. And so I spent a week there. And after the first couple of days, my heart began to soften for these kids and break. And as I was interacting them and watching them interact with one another, I just got so emotional because a lot of those kids didn't realize how special and unique. They didn't realize that, that they are. They didn't realize that they were made for more. And so I went home. I actually went to my great grandma's house and I sat at the kitchen table with her and I said, "Hey, I know this sounds so crazy, but I think I want to be a teacher." And she's like, "What? Why?" Because for years I was adamant, never, I had no desire to work with children at all. And I said, "Well, I want to be that one person in their life that's rooting for them." Because a lot of kids are dealt these cards, and they can't change them out. They can't control them. They have no choice but to play the cards that they're dealt with. So I want to be that wild card teacher that helps them see their full potential.
You just mentioned Wild Card, which is a book that came out recently by a married couple, and it's a phenomenal resource. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you incorporate the wild card part into your teaching philosophy?
Yes, so The Wild Cards by Hope and Wade King, and I started reading it a couple years ago. But it basically it's saying there's kids that have these cards that that they're dealt with, and it may be no parent involvement. It may be if English is their second language, ESOL, IEP, whatever it may be, and they have no choice. They can't say, "Hey, I really don't like this card. Can I trade it?" So the wild card is just talking about, how can you get them to fall in love with learning? How can you get them to keep them engaged, get them, running to your classroom every single day? When they leave, your classroom, they're going through things that they can't control. So how can you make your classroom a safe haven, an environment where they feel safe and loved and they're thriving?
So, with your teaching philosophy, I've seen you do incredible classroom transformations and different kind of engagements with your students. And I noticed that you have been a participant, maybe even a graduate of the Ron Clark Academy. I want to hear all about how you got connected with the Ron Clark Academy. I've seen you in pictures with him and Kim Bearden, and those, like, these are high hitter power players in education, and you're right there alongside them. Tell me more about that.
So I had no, when I was going through my college classes at Warren University, I had no idea who the Ron Clark was, Ron Clark Academy. And so before my first year of teaching, I want to say we started in August and I was on social media. Just, I was bored one day, scrolling through social media, and Ron Clark popped up. And I was like, who is this person? And I was intrigued by the video. Then I just kind of went down on like a deep dive rabbit hole. And then I was like, okay, there's Kim Beat. Oh, he has a whole school. And then I started watching his video. And so every year I implemented little by little of his teaching strategies. But I would say for the past 3 years, I have been going to his professional development. And that's where I meet him. I follow a lot of them on social media. I reach out to them, I ask questions, but it's mainly just going to his, social, his professional development every year.
So, do you think professional development is key in an educational career?
Yes. As an educator, it doesn't matter how long you're in the game, how long you've been doing it, you can always learn something, you can always improve. And, kids are evolving, education is evolving, so you got to stay up to date. So back when I was a kid, social media wasn't a big thing, but now kids are on TikTok, they're on constantly, every second they're getting a new video, so their attention span is a lot shorter. So you got to fight, how do you keep kids engaged, how do you keep them learning when every 5 seconds they have a new video or something streaming in front of their face.
So, how do you keep your kids engaged?
Well, first thing I do is I teach to the top, and I make it. I find my gifted kids or my top kids in each class, and I kind of create that productive struggle. And so then it's like, okay, well, if you're always teaching to the top, how do you meet the needs of the low kids and the cuff kids? Well, I do that by bridging that gap. And that's where the engagement piece comes in. That's where the student centered approach comes in, and then creating culturally relevant lessons.
I'd like you to dive in a little bit deeper about the culturally relevant lessons that is key in so many aspects of teaching and in education. So, culturally relevant teaching strategies. Give me some of the things that we need to know about that.
Okay, so no one cares about, Johnny had 3 apples, he gives away 2. How many apples does Johnny have? So get to know your students. What is a part of their culture? What is going on in the community that you can bring in, or not even just the community, but the state they live in or the United States? So, for example, my kids, they love Takis. And so on the board, I put a nutritional label of a Taki bag. And we just kind of looked at the nutrition, and we kind of had a discussion about, what's healthy, what's not. But while we were reviewing that, we were going over our place value standards. We're going over our multi-digit multiplication standards, but also what music do they like? What foods do they like? What do they like to do in their free time, and bring it into the classroom? So recently, two of my students, their parents work at a local donut shop. And so I created an entire lesson, and I made it where we had to help them run their donut shop. And so just bringing in what do they like, because they're more engaged when you just read kind of straight from the textbook or straight from the curriculum, but even something simple as, instead of like putting their name in it. So, hey, Daniel plays soccer for this many hours, but it doesn't have to be big, just little things like that.
What's so fun? This makes me think of some of the pictures I've seen recently about your classroom transformations. Break that down for us. Where do you start? How do you do it? How do you get all the supplies and the resources? It's such an undertaking. And for a new teacher, they might be freaking out. How do I do this? She's so great, and I don't know where to start. Give us like a little template on what to do.
Okay, so at first I thought, it had to be big, it had to be large, and I was totally wrong. So usually what I do is, so I get my resources. I can get through Donors Choose. Our school has a resource closet, and they buy stuff, or teachers put it in the resource, and we're able to check it out. They have a costumes in there that we can check out as well. But if you're someone who doesn't have that, I would just go to the community. I would go through Donors Choose. But I want them to keep in mind, it doesn't have to be crazy like I do. If you just throw on some tablecloths on the table, and you just put in costume and change your voice to get in character, the kids love that and they eat that up. So I don't want you to think that you have to spend hundreds of dollars just to transform your classroom. You can do it on a budget, and you can do it free. So, what I do now is I just take whatever's from next in the curriculum or a math worksheet, and I'm not creating task cards, I'm not laminating anything, but then I may just hang some stuff up around the room or put some tablecloths, and then I'm in character. You're doing the same thing. It's just you're goosing them into learning. So it's the same worksheet, same textbook. It's just you add in a little bit of details.
Do you ever use some of the new AI features that are so readily available to do those quick fixes where you populate some of the names or pull from different sources? Do you ever do that?
I used it for it was an AI creating an AI podcast. So I did an AI podcast, and what I'll do is I will. I think it's like it starts with notebook something.
It's a Google Notebook, yeah.
It's a Google Notebook. Okay, so I would say, oh man, there's a podcast I just heard, and they mentioned you guys, and then it could be random, like, hey, there's this class at West Bay Elementary, and they are just killing it in their math studies, and the kids are like, what? We're on a podcast? They mentioned our names. This is insane. That's the only AI I've used so far this year.
That's a great feature though, to just draw them in. It's really fun. But also I love the worksheet, making it personalized, making them feel important and seen and heard. Very, very sweet. What do you feel is your biggest strength or your superpower?
I would say my biggest strength or superpower would be my ability to relate and make those connections with not only my students, but their families as well.
Are family connections important? And if so, tell me more about that.
Oh, absolutely. So I spend, it's not a lot to me, it's not a lot, but I spend a lot of time creating those relationships with the parents because when you get them on board, when you get them to trust you, and they're like, you know what, that teacher, she loves and cares about my child, they do amazing stuff and they start to support you outside and inside of the classroom.
So having the student buy-in and having the parent buy-in is
Yes,
key.
absolutely.
What have been some of your biggest challenges? It could be like from the beginning or it could be recently.
I would say my biggest challenge would be not letting others dim your light. So I know there's a lot of amazing, genuine educators that are uplifting and they are kind and they're so supportive, but there's a handful of educators who aren't so kind and they're kind of negative. And I've experienced this. I know a lot of other educators experience this as well. But when you're a little outside of the box, when maybe you do stuff different and you decide to, I'm not going to take the stairs anymore like everyone else. I'm going to take the slide and I'm going to do things different. And a lot of some teachers, they just don't know how to react to that. And they can get mean and, nasty towards others. And that's something I was never prepared for. And so how throughout the years, it's been how do I keep my head up high? How do I block everything else and not let it filtrate into my classroom and affect what I'm doing with my kids? And as one of my coworkers, Captain Brack, says, don't let them medicate your sparkle.
So looking back, you've been in education for a while now. Is there anything that you would have done differently?
I would go back to the transformation. When I was first figuring out how to do a classroom transformation, I would go online and see these teachers with these over the top, elaborate transformations, which is awesome. And so I thought that's the only way a transformation could be. But I didn't realize, you wouldn't have to hang up anything in your classroom. You could just come in costume one day and, pretend you're a character. And the kids love that. So I spent a lot of my first years going over the top, or instead of just pairing it with a worksheet, I was creating and laminating all these different task cards, and it was just so much time.
So with all the different areas that you've explored and you've engaged with, what have been some of your biggest resources that you keep going to, tried and true, maybe textbooks, podcasts, online forums, blogs, whatever? Tell me about that.
What I go through, I'm gonna be honest, I get most of everything I do from the Ron Clark Academy. I follow all their social media and I just go through it like, oh, this is a great idea. Let me click on it and learn more. How did they do this? I know Dave Burgess, Teach Like a Pirate. I've learned a lot from him as well. Hope and Wade Key, just go into different professional development or picking up some books that other people recommend.
You have gotten quite a few awards lately. What is the one, or what are the awards that you are most proud of?
Well, recently I was nominated by one of my students' parents for the Golden Apple Teacher Award. And basically it said just for, my relationship and creating a positive, I guess, classroom experience. But I had no idea. It was a Wednesday. My admin come in and I'm like, what is going on? And they said, our local news channel comes in and presented me with the Golden Apple.
You've taught different grade levels, different school systems, and different schools, and they all have different cultures, and just sort of try stuff out and then really find your groove, and just all of a sudden it was just like boom, take off. That's been exciting to watch. I don't know if it's as exciting when you're like on that ride holding on for dear life. So can you tell me a little bit about the different grades that you have taught, maybe some things to know about just the differences within that structure, within grades, within systems, within education areas, because you've been in different districts too. Give me a little recap.
Well, I started my first year with eighth grade, seventh grade, and my second year, eighth grade, seventh grade, and then I transitioned and I remained in fourth grade math. And I did a little bit of fourth grade science, but since coming to West Bay, I just teach fourth grade math as well. But eighth grade, oh, I loved eighth grade. It was hard to connect with them at first. But once I broke down those walls and built that relationship, oh, I love the meaningful and the deep conversations that you can have with them. A lot more independent. Elementary, it's I love it just as much. The kids, it's easier to get them a little bit more engaged, easier to get their buy-in.
So, are there any questions that I could ask you that we could dive in a little deeper? Because you have so many great things to offer. What are some like things that are just like you're super passionate about right now that you could expand on?
So I guess I would just say, I don't know. I guess the one thing I do is I do a lot of whole group. I don't do a lot of small group at all. Barely any. And I know that's kind of a hot topic. So I do whole group and I don't teach at their level. I teach way above their level.
So, with whole group teaching, the philosophy is you give it to the group, and then you do the rest of the time you are breaking them down and doing pullouts in small groups, so the kids are working independently while you're working with a small group. And I do see that having its strengths but also its weaknesses. So give me your thoughts on why are you doing it whole group, and why are you giving it such a high level? You're setting the bar really high. Are the kids able to rise to that level?
Yeah, so my first 2 years of teaching, even in middle school, I did small groups, and then my third year teaching, and now my fourth year of teaching, I barely ever do small groups. It's mostly whole group, but it's not what you think it is. So it's not me at the front of the classroom just talking and talking the whole time. It's a student-centered approach. So I will pose a question on the board, and I don't have my kids raise hands. They just kind of speak. And so they'll say, well, Miss Robillard, I think, and then I'll look at them, they'll stand up. I think this is the first step, and here is why. And then the other students will either saying, I agree with you, I don't agree with you, or I would like to add on. So if another student disagrees, they'll stand up and say, hey, I politely disagree with you, and this is why. This is what I would do instead. And so you're kind of just as a teacher standing at the front and you're watching this discussion unfold. And a lot of the times I'll put a very complex problem up that I have not taught yet, and I will have them discuss to figure it out. And so I'm not up there at the front saying, okay, this is step one, this is step two. Okay, now repeat it after me. But I teach to the top because kids are capable of so much more than we realize. So if I can weave in some fifth grade standards, if I can weave in some middle school standards, I will. And when I'm planning my lessons, I think, okay, how can I create that, productive struggle? But also, what are the different ways that they're going to see these place value or these decimal questions? But I just make it hard because they can do it. They're so capable. And I know our textbooks, they don't reach our high level thinkers. They are created for your cuff kids, your bubble. They're kind of like in the medium range.
I saw you do a lot of hand gestures when you were answering questions. Are you having your students also do some of the hand gestures so you can capture the visual, the wiggly kids? Like, tell me about that. That was really neat to see.
Yes. So I don't want, so sometimes when, you're having that discussion, if you're not having everyone actively involved, so again, I agree, I disagree. So they're actively listening to the speaker and tracking the speaker. And I have my students stand and speak and move around when they speak. And so sometimes when someone's talking, a kid can zone out. So they have to show that, I'm listening, I agree with you. And then before, if someone wants to speak, before they give their input, they have to take what that person said before them to show that I was actually listening to what you were saying. But me as an educator, I use a lot of when I'm teaching, I'll do different stuff to keep them reeled in and engaged. And a lot of the times I don't teach it, the kids will just, I'll be like, all right, y'all, we're gonna multiply. And then every time I say multiply, they're going like this. And then something I don't teach, they just pick up on.
This makes me think of the connection between some of the continuing education trainings that we've had to go through. And we have to listen about how do you get to that student who is not English as their first language, or that student who is having auditory processing issues, the different types of learning that happens within a classroom, because you have all kinds of students. So having that extra layer to me is as one of those multi-tiered instructions that you are infusing into your class already, which is so powerful and something that is something a newer teacher can do, just those little things. Can you give us some info on how else you incorporate different methods of teaching, different styles of teaching to get to those students who aren't just going to read that book, absorb it, and move on to the next thing?
So so going back to teaching to the top, when they're seeing their peers, getting it and going quick, they, believe it or not, they want to work harder. And so like I said, I do not lower my standard for any child. I believe it doesn't matter where you come from, what's going on, what you're, labeled as, you can do anything you put your mind through. And so I will maybe walk around and I'll facilitate and I'll just, maybe sit with a group real quick or say, hey, let's do this together. But I offer during my lunch, I sit in the lunchroom. I'm like, if you want tutoring, come sit with me. During my planning, I offer tutoring as well, and as well as outside of the school. But if you go back to what I said earlier about the relationships, when you get them to buy in and they feel and you earn their respect, they want to work hard. So I haven't really had to have kids where like I'm begging them to do that math work, I'm begging them to do that problem. They know their strengths and they come to me and they're like, hey, can we do some extra tutoring? Can we do this? But I do a lot of walking around and facilitating and helping as well.
So is your degree in education, or did you go to school for something and then find your path, which you discussed earlier when you felt your heart move?
Yes, I went straight into education. And then when I went and I went to Maryland for college, I went chased after, softball. I didn't want to go into their education program because it's different than, what a Florida school has to do. So I was majoring in history. But then when COVID hit and everything was shut down for the next year and a half, I didn't want to be stuck up north. So then I went back home and I went back into education and finished my degree. But either way, I was going to go in education no matter what.
Once you felt the calling, you went for it.
Yes.
You mentioned softball. That's totally not something I was going to ask you about, but do you see any connections with team sports and teaching or team mindset in classrooms? Any kind of connection with that?
Yes, so I'm big on celebrating, and I know sports. I tell my kids, let's celebrate. Like, you know how when they win the Super Bowl and everyone's celebrating, that's how we should celebrate each other. That's how we celebrate education. So when we're doing our whole group and the kids are speaking, and a kid just says something phenomenal, the kids will clap for them. Or if you know how sometimes I know it happened to me as a kid, and the teacher would call on me, and I'm like, I don't know the answer. And there's just that awkward silence. My kids will turn and clap at that student and say, hey, you got this, you can do it. And it buys them an extra, 5 seconds. And every single time that has happened, they were able to spit out that right answer. And I teach them, we do a lot of games. Don't, if you lose, I know, you really wanted to win, but do not show anger. Do not be mean. You clap and you cheer for everyone. And so we just do a lot of celebrations in class all the time. Celebrate growth, celebrate good grades, just celebrate kindness as well.
What have been your years where you've seen the biggest growth? Has there been some sort of secret recipe, or is it once you started to get them excited about education?
It was once you get them excited and once you get that buy-in. So my first year of teaching, um, that was probably my favorite year. I had a hard bunch of kids. It was a hard group. And there was times where I'm like, I'm not gonna let these kids see me cry. But after they left, it was hard. My first year was hard. And then after Thanksgiving break, I don't know what happened. I didn't do anything different, but I didn't give up. I kept doing what I was doing. I kept doing the transformations, and they just completely bought in. But I've noticed with every year, my expectation is up here, and I don't lower it. I don't say, okay, you're probably only going to make a level 2, so here's your work. No, I'm teaching all kids like they're the level 5s, because they can do so much. And I've seen so many kids who, especially in 8th grade, where I was looking back from their 3rd grade testing history, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th, all the way up to 8th grade, they were getting ones on every single assessment. And then when they tested for civics, which I was teaching them, they jumped, never had anything higher than a 1, and all of a sudden they're getting a 4 or a 5 on that civics test. But that's just doing movement, music, engagement, and teaching to the top, being consistent and not lowering that standard.
Do you tend to look through the history, the file on a student before you start the school year? Or do you treat every student blank slate, high expectations, and then maybe go through and look at stuff if you need to here and there?
Blank slate. Every kid deserves a new year. And so when they entered my class, this is a new year, it's a blank slate. And I tell my kids, dream big, be bold. You can do anything you want. And once they start to believe that, everything that was once spoken over them, it's like, I didn't see that this year, right? You just proved all those people wrong. You are a good kid. You are smart. You are capable. So it just takes, I guess, that just one person believing in them. And because I know a lot of times we label kids, and, no kid is inherently bad or evil. You just gotta, find that connection and, work with them. That's why relationships are so huge in education.
Okay, you got to dive in there and pull out the goodness, throw the labels away. I love that you just turned them over and said, I'm not buying into that history. I'm going to treat you like you are your best version of yourself, person that you are called to be. Well, thank you, Alana, so much for being on EduCurious. You had amazing things to offer, the connection with the students and some of the parts of your teaching journey and career that you were able to share with us. I really appreciate you coming on. And join us next time on EduCurious, where we interview other educators, see what they have to share with us, because it's a collaboration. We're not in this alone, and we are doing our very best. We want to hear what you have to say. So thanks, and I will see you next time.